December 24th, 2002, the city of Modesto was preparing for Christmas. Streets were decorated with lights. Families were finishing last-minute shopping, and many households were preparing for the holiday gatherings that would take place the following day. It was meant to be a peaceful time of celebration. But that morning, something unsettling was about to begin unfolding inside a modest suburban home. Inside that home lived Laci Peterson and her husband, Scott Peterson. To those who knew them, the couple seemed like a normal young family beginning a new chapter in life. Laci was 8 months pregnant with their first child, a baby boy they planned to name Connor. Friends and family described her as warm, optimistic, and deeply excited about becoming a mother. She had spent months preparing for the arrival of the baby, decorating the nursery and imagining what life would soon look like with a newborn in their home. But on that Christmas Eve morning, Laci Peterson vanished. At first, the disappearance seemed confusing, but not necessarily sinister. When Scott Peterson returned home later that day, he claimed that his wife was not there. Her car remained parked in the driveway, but Laci herself was nowhere to be found. Concern quickly began to spread when family members realized she had missed important holiday plans and was not answering her phone. What began as a missing persons case would soon grow into one of the most widely followed murder investigations in American history. This is Avalor. Subscribe for deep documentary storytelling. Now, let's begin. When Laci Peterson was reported missing, the community of Modesto responded immediately. Volunteers gathered to help search nearby parks, neighborhoods, and open areas. Flyers with Laci's photograph were printed and distributed across the city. The image showed a smiling young woman with long, dark hair, visibly pregnant and glowing with anticipation for the future. Friends described her as someone who loved cooking, spending time with family, and preparing for motherhood. The idea that she would simply leave without telling anyone seemed impossible. As investigators began examining the house, they noticed something strange. Laci's personal belongings were still there. Her purse, keys, and other essential items had not been taken. For someone who was nearly 9 months pregnant, it seemed extremely unlikely that she would have gone far without these things. Scott Peterson told police that on the morning of December 24th, he had gone fishing alone in the San Francisco Bay. According to him, Laci had planned to walk the family dog while he was gone. When he returned home that afternoon, he claimed the dog was in the yard, but Laci had disappeared. Investigators carefully documented the timeline. The details Scott provided seemed straightforward at first, but some aspects of his story would later raise serious questions. In the early days of the investigation, police focused primarily on finding Laci. Search teams combed through nearby neighborhoods and parks. Helicopters flew overhead scanning open fields. Boats searched waterways in the region. Meanwhile, the media began covering the case extensively. Television stations broadcast updates daily. The story of a missing pregnant woman during the holidays captured national attention almost immediately. At first, Scott Peterson appeared cooperative with investigators. He participated in interviews and stood beside family members during press conferences. But as the investigation continued, certain details about his behavior began to concern both detectives and the public. Some people noticed that Scott's emotional reactions appeared distant. During interviews, he often spoke calmly and without visible distress. While everyone responds to trauma differently, investigators began to question whether his behavior matched that of a husband desperately searching for his missing wife. As detectives dug deeper into Scott Peterson's life, they uncovered a secret that would dramatically change the direction of the investigation. In the weeks before Laci's disappearance, Scott Peterson had begun a relationship with another woman named Amber Frey. At the time, Amber had no idea that Scott was married or that his wife was pregnant. Scott had told her that he was a single man who had never been married. The relationship continued for several weeks. They spoke on the phone frequently and had spent time together socially. What made the situation even more disturbing was something Scott had told Amber shortly before Christmas. He claimed that he had lost his wife. At the time, Amber believed he meant that his wife had died in the past. She had no reason to suspect that he was referring to a situation that had not even happened yet. When Amber eventually learned about the missing persons case involving Laci Peterson, she immediately contacted police. Her cooperation would become one of the most important developments in the investigation. Once investigators confirmed Scott's relationship with Amber Frey, they began analyzing the timeline of events more closely. The fishing trip Scott claimed to have taken on Christmas Eve became a central focus of their attention. Scott said he had driven to the Berkeley Marina and spent the day fishing alone in the waters of San Francisco Bay. Detectives verified that he had indeed been there, but questions remained. Why would someone go fishing alone on Christmas Eve? Why had Scott not mentioned this trip to family members beforehand? And why had he purchased a small fishing boat only weeks earlier without telling many people about it? Investigators also discovered that Scott had researched ocean currents and tides in the Bay Area shortly before Laci disappeared. Individually, each detail might have been explained away, but together they began forming a pattern that investigators found difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, the search for Laci continued across California. Volunteers remained determined to bring her home, but weeks passed with no sign of her. As the investigation entered the new year, the story had become a national obsession. News programs discussed the case daily. Thousands of people followed developments online and through television coverage. The image of a smiling pregnant woman who had disappeared just before Christmas resonated deeply with the public. Many people believed that someone must have seen something important. Search efforts expanded far beyond Modesto. Investigators examined potential sightings and tips from across the country. Unfortunately, none of them led to Laci. Despite the uncertainty, her family remained hopeful. They organized vigils and continued urging the public to come forward with any information. Behind the scenes, however, detectives were building a case. 4 months after Laci Peterson disappeared, a devastating discovery was made. In April 2003, the remains of a fetus were found along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay. Shortly afterward, the remains of a woman were discovered nearby. DNA testing confirmed the identities. They were Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The location of the discovery was hauntingly significant. It was not far from the same Bay Area where Scott Peterson claimed to have gone fishing on the morning Laci disappeared. The investigation now shifted from a search for a missing woman to a homicide case, and the evidence increasingly pointed toward one person. Shortly after the remains were identified, police arrested Scott Peterson. When he was taken into custody in April 2003, he had changed his appearance and was carrying several items that suggested he might have been preparing to leave the area. Prosecutors soon announced that Scott would face charges for the murders of both Laci Peterson and their unborn child. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched courtroom proceedings in modern American history. During the trial, prosecutors presented a large body of circumstantial evidence. They argued that Scott Peterson had planned the murder in advance and used his fishing trip as a cover story. They pointed to his secret relationship with Amber Frey as evidence that he wanted to escape his marriage and upcoming responsibilities as a father. Recorded phone conversations between Scott and Amber were played in court. In those recordings, Scott spoke casually while attending public vigils searching for Laci. To many observers, the contrast between his words and the situation unfolding around him was deeply disturbing. The defense team argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial and that no direct proof linked Scott to the murders. The trial lasted months. In November 2004, the jury reached its decision. After carefully reviewing the evidence and testimony, they found Scott Peterson guilty of the murders of Laci Peterson and her unborn son. The verdict brought a sense of closure to many people who had followed the case for nearly 2 years, but it could never undo the loss that Laci's family had suffered. Laci Peterson had been a daughter, a sister, a friend, and an expectant mother looking forward to meeting her child. Her life, and the life of her unborn son, had been taken away in a tragedy that shocked the entire nation. Today, the story of Laci Peterson remains one of the most widely discussed true crime cases in American history. It is remembered not only for the investigation and trial, but also for the powerful reminder it offers about how appearances can be misleading. To many people, the Peterson household once seemed ordinary and happy, but beneath that appearance, secrets and tensions had been building. The case also changed public awareness about crimes involving pregnant women and missing persons investigations. Most importantly, it reminds us of the lives that were lost. Laci Peterson had been preparing for motherhood, decorating a nursery, and planning a future with her child. That future was taken away in a crime that left an entire community mourning. Even years later, the memory of Laci and baby Connor continues to resonate with those who followed the case, because behind every headline is a human story. And in this one, a young mother and her unborn son were lost far too soon. This is Abalore. Subscribe.